Hello, everyone. Good to see you here on week 6 of our DIY gravel series. Hope everybody's week is going well. It's stupidly hot here in Vermont, so trying to just stay cool. As usual, a few housekeeping items. Just mute yourself unless you want to talk, and feel free to be on camera or not, whether you want to be seen on social media or not, or this will continue to live on the YouTubes. And if you have any questions, you can submit them in the chat box or raise your hand. And I am very excited for today's discussion because as somebody who's ridden a bike for 20 years, I still have a whole lot to learn on the maintenance side of things. And so I'm thinking I'm going to have to employ the 75% rule we talked about last week of setting a bike maintenance goal and being happy if I even execute on 75% of it. It's not my strong point, so I'm very excited to have Sarah Lamb here today for part 1 of a 2-part series. We were lucky enough to have a women's clinic in Vermont last year and have a team of 3 female pro mechanics, which was so awesome, and Sarah Lamb was one of them. Andrea Smith was another who will be helping to lead a gravel skills webinar soon. Sarah is a professional race mechanic who has worked with neutral support programs and the Cannondale pro cross team for the past 12 plus years. She's also a self-proclaimed huge nerd who taught AP Physics and undergraduate engineering courses for 7 years before joining a surgical robotics program 3 years ago as an R&D engineer. Clearly a very smart and accomplished woman. Thank you so much for being here today, Sarah.
Yeah, thank you for kind of putting together the series and, you know, in inviting us to speak. It's definitely a strange year with so many races canceled and clinics canceled. I know the Vermont clinic was definitely a highlight of my year last year. And the fact that we had 3 women mechanics there, I'm pretty sure this is the most of us I've ever seen in the same place at the same time. You know, it's definitely probably one of the more underrepresented parts or, you know, demographics in the industry, but I fell into it totally by chance. And, you know, any opportunity to kind of give back and get more women on bikes, more women confident working on their own bikes, you know, that's sort of, you know, where I love working on this stuff now. So I grew up working in shops in Connecticut, and somewhere along the line, you know, somebody said, hey, girls don't do that. And I've been proving them wrong ever since. It kind of became a USA Cycling, UCI race mechanic kind of by accident, you know, along that same line of proving people wrong. You know, hey, I can do this, I'm going to get certified, and then, you know, got invited to races, and the rest is history. So I've worked at a lot of the big races in North America, Tour of California, Tour of Utah, Tour of Colorado, whether it's driving the neutral support car. So like if you're watching the Tour de France and there's the yellow car that follows the riders, if a bike breaks, somebody jumps out, that's what I do. You know, that driving the car, jumping out of the car, on the motorcycle, you know, I've been very fortunate to work with a lot of, you know, incredible athletes and team directors and staff who are, you know, very in support of getting women on bikes and getting women racing and confident, and it's been great. So I've worked with Laura and Amber and a lot of the other panelists on this series to put on a bunch of clinics. I've worked with the local and national juniors teams, and it's definitely that aspect of giving back that and kind of getting people, you know, comfortable and believing in themselves, you know, as far as taking care of their own equipment. So I know that we were, Laura had put out on the Facebook group a question of what people wanted to cover today, and it seemed there was, we were joking before the call that we could probably do 2 whole weeks just on the tubeless discussion. But I think that, for me, it comes down to the basics. Everything starts at the basics, and that's why we made it sort of a 2-week series. So what I'd kind of like to go through today is, how to get your bike ready for a ride, what tools you should have at home, what tools you should have on your ride, how to take care of your bike after a ride. I know bike washing is a hot topic these days. And then, another piece of this is sort of those on the fly repairs. It might not always be a Red Bull can, but there's a lot that you can do to fix stuff that goes wrong while you're riding. And how to tell, based on how your bike is acting, and what you're seeing, hearing, feeling, whether you can fix something at home or whether it's something that you should plan on taking into a bike shop. And feel free, I guess the chat is open, so chime in with questions. I don't know if people can unmute themselves or how we want to handle questions, but feel free to stop me and kind of let me know. We can go more in depth, less in depth on just about anything. And like I said, we have part 2 next week to kind of do either a live demo of something or set aside some time to have that long thesis on tubulars or tubeless rather. So the basics for me are really getting ready for the ride. So how to prep your bike. Tire pressure is a big thing, obviously, as you're riding gravel. It really depends on the bike. It depends on the rider. So my cross bike I have behind me, yes, the endless debate. So tire pressure, I'll probably run a little bit higher pressure because I have clincher wheels on this. If you're running tubulars, you can run a very low pressure, and the same with tubeless, you can get a bit lower on that. Craftsman, I usually use a floor pump, but Craftsman actually makes, I don't know if they still make it, but they have a cordless drill pump that you can actually dial in your pressure to like the 10th decimal place. So we use that a lot for the Cannondale team, because at that level, they can tell the difference between 25.5 and 26 psi. But tire pressure is one thing that I set every time before I go out the door. The other thing that I will always check is headset tightness. So if you're not familiar with where the headset on your bike is, it's this piece here. Hopefully you can kind of see, and it holds the stem onto the fork, or the steer tube of the fork rather. And that is, every headset will have a torque spec on it, and that's where we kind of get into the wish list of tools to keep at home. And I tend to do like show and tell a lot with clinics, and I'm very hands-on, so the whole Zoom thing is weird for me, so stop me if you need to see anything or want pictures. We can post them on Facebook afterwards. But one of my must-have tools is a torque wrench. So this one is adjustable, so you can dial it up, you can dial it down. I would use this before I go out the door just to make sure that headset is, if it's spec to 5 Newton meters of torque, I'm going to set the wrench at 5, and it's going to click and actually release when it hits 5 Newton meters. That's something that's super, super, super important for safety, especially if you're riding gravel, if you're riding mountain. you know, where you're going over bumps, you're rattling things around, you really want that to be secure. The headset, I'm kind of seeing a comment pop up. The headset does get loose just over time. It will sort of loosen itself up. I would definitely say, for me personally, it's just one of those things. I check it before I go out the door. It's just part of a routine. And I'd rather check it and know it's good than not check it. So if I was going to check it, somebody's asking to show. If I was going to check it on this bike, the headset is right here. And I would take my torque wrench, set it, hey Dad, and I would twist the torque wrench until it's tight, and then it would automatically release, and you'd hear a click telling you that it's released. Typically, my bikes live in the basement. The lighting down there is terrible. So I moved things up here for this, so it's a little bit tight to move around, but hopefully that helps explain some of the torque specs there. The other thing I do before a ride is that I would check your chain. You don't need to lube your chain before every ride, but you do need to check it. So something to kind of keep in mind is if your chain is dry, like bone dry and kind of creaking. Does a bumpier ride loosen the headset, or does it just gradually loosen over time? Both. A bumpier ride will be tougher on your equipment, but the headset will just kind of loosen over time, wear and tear. You know, the more aggressive you're riding, putting pressure on it, the more it's going to sort of need that maintenance. So chain. So before you're riding, I would check the chain. Don't drown it in lube right away. Just check, see what its condition is. If it's bone dry, definitely go ahead and add chain lube. And there are different lubes for different conditions. So there's a dry chain lube, there's a wet chain lube, depending on how you're planning to ride, what the conditions are. If you're going to go on a very muddy ride, I'd use the wet chain lube. If you're going on a road ride in the dead heat of summer, I would definitely use the dry lube. If your chain is crunchy, like you can see grit and grime, you definitely want to clean it and re-lube it before you ride. If it's dripping, like you put too much lube on there the last time, you definitely want to clean it and reapply lube before you ride. And the same thing goes if it's sticky. So if it's, you can either feel it sticking on the cogs, or you can touch it and it feels like just gross, sticky. You know, that'll attract the grit and the grime. That's something you would definitely want to clean as well. So if you forget to re-lube your chain, I'm seeing your question on that. It's not the end of the world. It's actually the general rule that I would say with chain lube is that less is more. So I would tend to go light on the chain lube and reapply it more often than have it dripping every time. So this is sort of my favorite tool for cleaning a chain. And this is not something that you would ride with, but this is one of those add to the wish lists. And again, we can maybe post pictures on the Facebook group or something like that. But there's Pedro's makes this thing called a chain pig, which is yeah, cooking spray will work. WD-40 is not chain lube. We'll talk about that in a minute. But the chain pig, I actually found one in a box. That's not all gross and greasy. This is probably the coolest little device that I've found yet to work on chains. You actually don't get your hands dirty cleaning your chain at all if you use this. It hooks onto your derailleur cage. You pour the lube inside the pig and run the chain through it. And then, so everything is modular and comes apart to clean afterwards, but it's all enclosed is the best part. So you don't even get your hands dirty, which is why it's awesome. And you just run your chain through this while it's on your bike, and it's fresh and clean. You can dry it with a clean rag and then apply lube fresh. It takes probably 5 minutes tops, you know, to set up, clean, reapply everything, which is awesome.
Yeah, just to clarify, you're using that to clean your chain, not to lube.
Yes, to clean it. So if the chain is crunchy, if the chain is dripping wet, if it's sticky, if it just needs a good scrubbing, clean it with this, dry it, and then apply lube.
And then can you talk about your technique when applying lube? Are you applying it to the middle of the links and wiping the outside, or what's your
my technique when applying chain lube is probably not as OCD as it could be, probably just because I'm doing this, 50 times in the span of, an hour or something at a cross race. But I will typically take a rag and hold it underneath the chain. And usually I'll go on the bottom so that the lube doesn't drip onto the frame. I'll hold it underneath and I'll just put a tiny drop of lube, on every link, and spin the chain, put the drops on, spin the chain, and have a rag under it to catch anything. And you'll also, once you kind of hit most of the links with that lube, you want to shift through your gears, because you're not just lubing the chain, you're lubing your drivetrain, the entire thing. The crankset, you're lubing the cassette, the derailleur pulleys, everything kind of needs a little bit of grease to keep it working properly. So that's sort of my at-home check that I'll do. The other thing I'll do before I ride is just make sure I have everything in a seat bag that I think I could possibly need. Obviously, you can't carry a whole bike shop with you, as nice as it would be sometimes, and as much as I've definitely freaked people out on rides before, being like, hey, I'm walking my dogs, and I see a guy from the local team with his bike flipped over, working on something, and I don't think, and I just say, hey, if you roll a half a mile down the hill, I have the SRAM car at my house, I'll fix it for you. And they look at me like, okay, crazy stalker. Things to pack so that you're prepared to deal with what could go wrong, right? So I carry, this is literally my seat bag that I take on every ride. I switch it between my bikes, kind of change out an inner tube or something depending on whether I'm riding my cross bike, my road bike, something like that. So in here, I will always keep a CO2 cartridge, an inflator head. And so this, it's kind of less elegant than most, but it's more compact. I just put some electrical tape to sort of keep it together, so it's not in a case or anything. I can cram it in there, but I don't worry about it puncturing. I keep tire levers. Again, I ride clincher wheels on most of my bikes, all of my bikes. So I will carry tire levers. I will carry a spare tube. Obviously, if you are riding tubular wheels or you're riding tubeless wheels, you could substitute this out for the valve core extractor tool, and a tiny little bottle of cafe latex or Stans, whatever sealant you want to use. You know, it sort of depends on personal preference, bike preference, you know, what have you. I will also carry a multi-tool with me. And there's this is another one of those conversations that we could have for days on end, is what the best multi-tool is. For me as a race mechanic, the criteria are pretty simple. I need a multi-tool that has a T25 bit, which is sort of that star head. It's not a typical hex key. And it needs to be small enough to fit in girl pants pockets when I'm jumping out of the car or jumping off a motorcycle. So, and I use it for everything. Now that I've found, you know, probably 10 years to find this little guy, it goes everywhere with me. Whether I'm on my own ride, whether I'm at Tour of California, whether I'm at a local race, it doesn't matter. That's kind of my go-to. And, you know, obviously I will carry ID, I'll carry some cash. The big thing that you never, ever, ever want to leave home without, especially if you are riding in the woods, is a derailleur hanger. If you don't have one of these, a spare one, I mean, everyone has one on their bike, I'm hoping. If you don't have a spare one, go to your local bike shop, go on Amazon, go on, you know, Wheels Manufacturing, and buy two. They're worth every penny. So the logic behind a derailleur hanger, I guess, is, and this is probably a good, you know, show and tell moment as well. The logic behind a derailleur hanger is that the rear derailleur attaches to the frame, not directly. There's a derailleur hanger in between, and it's difficult to kind of see, you know, over Zoom. But the derailleur hanger goes from the very tip of the seat stays. It's a little like S-shaped piece that bolts onto the frame, and then it bolts onto the derailleur. So the idea is if you crash, your derailleur hanger will either break or bend, and your derailleur and your frame will be fine.
Might also add that if you travel with your bike,
You
this
know,
is really helpful to have, because depending on how you pack your bike, it's really important to protect
yes.
the derailleur hanger and
Yeah.
have an extra just in case.
Yeah, yep, especially if you're traveling. You know, you can kind of see the part here, right? It's that little S shape that, you know, will bolt onto the frame here, and this will hold the derailleur. It's probably a $20 piece of aluminum that could save you thousands in a frame repair or a new derailleur. So it's definitely, you know, a tiny little part, but well worth having a spare. I always carry one with me. You know, I've definitely, you know, on a race course, saved people's rides by having, you know, a full kit of like every hanger known to man. Because the thing about a derailleur hanger, and this is where you may want to consult your shop, your local shop, to find out which derailleur hanger you need. They're specific not just to the brand of bike, but they're specific to the model and the year. So a Cannondale Super X from 2018 has a different derailleur hanger than a Cannondale Super X, basically the same bike, from 2019, for example. You know, and that's going to be different, right, than an Orbea derailleur hanger from the same year or something like that. That's, I think, kind of the most that you can say about derailleur hangers without getting your hands on one. If you're on a ride and it does break or bend. You can usually get one good straighten out of it before the metal is so fatigued that I would say it's just not safe to ride. You might as well change it out, right? So the way that you straighten the derailleur hanger is you would look at the bike from, like, look head on to the rear tire, and if you see your derailleur is like super smushed into that rear wheel, you want to just grab the derailleur and pull it out. That's sort of an on the ride fix. If you're home and you feel like spending a lot of money on a tool, you could buy a hanger alignment tool, which actually threads into the derailleur hanger and lets you straighten it almost as if you're truing a wheel. That's sort of one of, I keep it on hand because, it's useful for me at races. And it's, I basically have a bike shop in my basement at this point. But this is one of those, not basic tools to keep at home, but it's definitely helpful. And it just allows you to sort of thread into that derailleur hanger and use your rear wheel to really line up where that derailleur should be. And like I said, you could probably get one good straighten out of a hanger that's bent before the metal is so fatigued that it's going to snap the next time something happens. So that kind of covers my, going out for a ride and getting through a ride checklist. I don't know if there's any questions so far that I've missed. Extra chain links, that's definitely something, you could carry an extra chain link or two. Personal preference, I guess. I typically don't ride with a chain tool. I fortunately haven't had too many chain issues while riding. I know that they do have multi-tools that have a chain breaker in them. Park Tool makes a nice set of pliers that you can actually put into a chain to push apart a link, and then you can put them back in and squeeze it back together. For me, it's one of those like must-have at home tools for me, but it's not something that I would ride with. You could, if you were really going out on like a bike packing trip, or you were going on a really aggressive ride, like I know Laura just did her DIY gravel dirty Kansas ride. I might consider, for something like that, riding with a pre-cut chain, similar to like what I would carry with me in a neutral car, which is just I would get a chain from a bike shop or from Amazon or wherever you source your stuff from, and I would measure it out for my bike. I would cut it at home, have a master link ready to go, and just put that chain into my pack, so that if something happens, if my chain explodes on a ride, I don't have to think. I just put the new one on and keep going.
This might be a dumb question, but how do you measure it out when your chain is already on your bike?
Yeah, that is not a dumb question at all. So it's obviously the perfect solution is, you could take the chain off and you could put them side by side and measure it. The shortcut way is to go big to big and add 2 links. So what that means is that I would put my chain, I would lay my chain or hold it up against the largest cog or the largest chain ring in the front and the largest cog on the cassette in the back. I would get that perimeter, right? So big to big, and then I would add 2 or 3 links, and then cut. So that's sort of the workaround. you know, it might not be a perfect, perfect fit, but it's enough that you'll be able to shift. You're going to be able to run your bike like you normally would with that. So I don't know, am I missing any other questions?
Do you have any other tips? I mean, let's say nobody on this call knows how to install a chain. Is that something you can kind of explain
Yeah.
Zoom?
Yeah, it's going to be tough over Zoom, but we can give it a try. So if I'm installing a chain, let me try to get this here. So if I'm installing a chain, right, I would measure it sort of big in the back to big in the front, add a couple of links. You would have to break, if it's not already broken, you'd have to break the chain that's on your bike and thread the new one through. So you want to make sure if you're running a front derailleur that the chain goes through the front derailleur before it goes over the chain rings. And then you have to make sure that it's going through the derailleur pulleys. And that's going to, most of them are pretty standard from, you know, SRAM to Shimano to Campy, whatever. But you do want to make sure that you're catching on both of those derailleur pulleys before you're going over the cassette. So once you've kind of got that set, it's a little bit of a balancing act where you need to kind of pull the chain together at the same time you're putting a master link on. But that's probably the easiest way. You know, I do a lot with the SRAM chain. That's my favorite, just because they run with a master link, whereas Shimano chain sometimes has a pin that you have to push back in, so you really need a chain tool for that.
Sarah, how are you breaking the chain?
I would break it with just a chain tool like this. So
do you have one on your multi-tool?
On this multi-tool, I don't. They do make multi-tools that have chain breakers. You know, I know a lot of people that ride with them. I think I'm just so used to working with this multi-tool from being at races where, you know, in a race situation, if something goes wrong with your chain, I know that it's faster for me to give you a bike off the roof of my car than it is for me to measure your chain, you know, change it out. A lot of times if a chain breaks catastrophically, it'll tangle up the derailleur, you'll have to extract it out, which isn't such a big deal. But if you've got somebody, you know, in a race situation who has that failure, it's going to be, you know, my sort of calculation that I'll do whenever I come up on a situation like that is I know that I can do a bike change in 2 minutes. If whatever I'm looking at that's wrong with a bike is going to take longer than 2 minutes to fix, I'm going to give that person a bike. I'm going to shoot up the road, fix whatever's wrong with their bike, and then meet them to swap back.
I think we wish you could have access to you in gravel races, but since we don't and we have to have, you know, do it on the fly, probably by ourselves or maybe with somebody who stops to assist. Let's say something goes wrong with our chain in a race. What are your suggestions?
Something goes wrong with the chain, I think the first suggestion would be don't panic. You know, no matter how tangled it is, you can always get it apart. That's something where, you know, if it's a chain that has a master link, you could probably, I mean, I have friends who have taken a pair of pliers like this and cut them down super small. And thanks, Dad. And then, you know, made my dad's home from Missouri.
Such a dad thing to not realize you're like recording something.
It's fine. No,
It's
I
really
mean, yeah, he's kind of the co-star here, you know.
We'll
The reason that,
in the YouTube video, we'll credit, Sarah's
yeah,
dad.
yeah. No, the reason that I'm able to go to so many bike races, honestly, you know, and travel all over the place is because of him. So, you know, he'll come in and hang out with my dogs or hold down the fort, so that I can go play bikes for 2 weeks. So, you know, and he, you know, taught me everything I know, of course. So, but yeah, to Laura's point, I have friends who've taken pliers like this and sort of cut them down, modified them so that they're tiny and can fit in like a handlebar bag or something in a gravel race. And then they can pull apart a master link on the fly and they'll pack an extra one or something like that. You know, or if you're on a super long race like a Dirty Kanza, I definitely know of people who've kind of taken a pre-cut chain with them to help out with that. But it definitely, I can say the biggest piece of advice I would have would be don't panic. Because if you panic in a situation like that and the chain is, say, like all wedged up in the rear wheel and the derailleur and it's a hot mess, if you're freaking out, you're just going to make it worse. And I say that because it's happened to me, you know, where I'm in a race, you know, get out and there's, you know, I don't know, a television camera right there, like filming your every move. And I'm like, oh my God, like I'm pretty shy to begin with. And, you know, I'll be trying to get that chain out and just panic. And, you know, it takes twice as long, sort of thing.
I have a question for you that's not about like mechanic stuff, but I mean, it kind of is. So who hires you full time? Is it SRAM?
So full time, I am a systems engineer on a surgical robot.
Oh, okay.
Within the bike industry, I am more of like a contractor type employee, I guess. So like I work a lot with Mavic. I work with SRAM. I work with NRS. So those programs, you know, we'll sort of reach out to individual mechanics and bring them on as contractors. And you know, when I first started, it was a lot of volunteer work. So, you know, they would cover all your expenses, you know, to take you to these races, and you know, you wouldn't have to pay for travel or lodging or food or anything like that, but you wouldn't get paid. You wouldn't get a paycheck at the end of the year. You'd get product back. So like Mavic would say, hey, you know, you helped us at all these races this year, have a set of wheels, something like that. Now the industry is definitely shifting more towards like the day rate contractor model, where a company will say, okay, we think that your day rate should be whatever, and then you'll get a check at the end for that times however many days you worked.
So if there are women, so one of the things you said is like there are definitely more women involved, but like if people are like, oh, that could be kind of fun, like how do women get into that? I know sure at the school, right? Like a mechanic school?
Yeah, so there's definitely more opportunities for you know, women to get into the industry these days. I mean, I know that there's a bunch of different bike schools out there. There's an organization called the Professional Bicycle Mechanics Association, that I was one of the founding board members for, that they're doing a lot to promote women and, you know, minorities, people of color, in cycling, on, you know, I always make the joke of, you know, both sides of the handlebars, whether you're riding or working on the bike. They're doing a lot in that sense. But really just reach out to your local shop, start asking questions. You know, I started with my dad, really taking bikes apart and putting them back together, you know, trying to fix my own bike and then working in shops. if you're specifically interested in sort of that race mechanic world that I live in, USA Cycling has a clinic that they put on every year in Colorado Springs. So you'll go out there, there'll be presentations, it'll be hands-on teaching from some of the who's who in the race mechanic world, and there's a written test, and then there's a practical test at the end of that, and then the high scores on each get taken to races and kind of assimilate from there. But it definitely, I think the biggest thing I would say is confidence, and start small. If you don't know how to change a flat tire, then say, you know what, the next time I get a flat, I'm going to change it myself. Start there, right? Or say, hey, this is something that happened the last time I was out for a ride, and I didn't know how to fix it. I had to call a friend. I had to take an Uber to a shop and let them fix it. Start with that and say, hey, I'm gonna teach myself, or find a friend or a shop who's willing to teach me this thing, right? And that way I know if it happens to me again, I can take care of it myself. I don't have to rely on someone else to fix it. And I think that's, I always try to surround myself, whether it's in, my day job, or whether it's in cycling, I try to surround myself with people who know a lot more than I do, and just try to soak up everything I can, from just being around them and watching them work too. So, because even if you've been doing this for 12 years or more, it's like there's still my way of doing something might be slightly different than somebody else's way. I know when I first started as a race mechanic, if we're working and there's a crash and we have to push somebody back in from a service, it's you hold under the seat and you like lean into them and you push them, and you run with them for a few steps. And I'm a lot smaller than most of the guys that I work with. And if we're in a men's race, especially like a men's crit on the road, these guys are huge, right? And they're a lot bigger than me. So we had to kind of come up with a different way for me to hold these guys, to push them back into the race so that they wouldn't take me out while they were getting back into the race. So like the way that I would do something like that is very different from how, one of the guys that I work with would do that, but that doesn't make either way wrong. And we kind of learn from each other in that sense. I think I saw another question in the chat and I missed what it was.
It's about
the
way to put your chain on once you drop
dropping chains. A drop chain is definitely much better than like a totally twisted up chain. The best way to put it back on, I would say, I kind of personally grab the derailleur cage and push it in as far as I can, and just to get some slack in the chain, and then try to hook it back on.
What about while riding?
Oh,
First
while
of all,
riding,
don't pedal.
Yeah, don't pedal. Don't go sticking your hands in the spokes, I would say. That's definitely one of those I've seen people do it. I am personally not coordinated enough to pull something like that off. But if you have tips for how to do that while riding, that is definitely one of those that I could learn from too.
I guess what's worked for me is sometimes you can shift from one ring to the other and it will kind of like reset itself back on.
Yeah. If it's skipping, I've had that happen, where like you could reset it, but I guess I'm thinking like totally dropped off the gears. And then I'm like, oh, that's a problem. So I'm not sure how we're doing on time. The other sort of basic things that I would kind of cover would be how to take care of your bike after you get home from a ride. So I'm a big believer in washing your bike. And for me, it's always nice personally to work on a clean bike, but it helps your equipment last longer too. So, you know, if I'm at a cyclocross race, which is sort of similar to gravel, I mean, we're power washing bikes. We are, you know, really scrubbing the cassette, scrubbing the chain rings, making sure that, you know, there's not mud caked in there and rocks and grit that would wear out the equipment faster, which is especially helpful, you know, if you're not on a sponsored team where you just get cases of chains from SRAM every couple weeks. When you're actually, you know, sourcing your components from a local bike shop or from online, wherever, you definitely want to make sure that you're taking care of your stuff. And bike washing is a great way to start with that. So that's one of those things. You know, at home, I would use a hose. I definitely have had situations where I lived in an apartment and didn't have access to a hose. And in that case, one of those little like insect sprayer bottles that you pump and like it pressurizes it, that works just as well. You know, to sort of wet the bike down, scrub it with even something like a Simple Green cleaner would work great to get, you know, where it's natural based. Pedro's makes a whole line of them, but it's basically something like Simple Green, diluted, of course, but that will kind of get the grease, get the mud off, you know, scrub it, rinse it, and then make sure that, you know, you can leave it out in the sun to dry. You could dry it with sort of those microfiber towels. If you don't have time to dry it, that's where I would say that's the only time I would put WD-40 on a chain. So the WD, water displacement. So if you don't have time to dry your bike, putting some WD-40 on the chain and on the really like the moving parts will displace the water that's there and keep those parts from seizing up on you. If you are drying it, definitely lube your chain as soon as it's dry so that it doesn't seize. And then it's so hard to do to like talk through bike washing without like a hands-on demo, you know. I know last year at our clinic in Vermont we had a ton of fun with it. So
those are some good tips though.
Yeah.
Do you have any specific questions as it pertains to bike washing or anything else that's gone over?
No, we're good. Wear a mask, please. Dad. I said wear a mask, please.
Yes.
Okay.
Good advice.
Excellent.
Well, I don't see any other questions. I know if you think about it as you're going on this week and thinking more about bike maintenance, if you have questions, please just add them to our thread in the Facebook group and maybe we can address them next week. Does that sound good, Sarah?
That sounds great. Yeah, and the other thing that we can do, I know I talked through a lot of the tools to keep on hand. We can post some pictures on the Facebook group too. You know, if people are looking to make a Christmas list 6 months early or something like that. You know, the other thing I think I did notice in the Facebook comments leading up to this week was how to deal with disc brake rotors. And that's something, you know, if I'm riding a bike that has disc brakes, you know, my gravel bike, my road bike at this point don't. but I would definitely hang on to, this is one of my favorite little tools. It's called a stew stick. And this is, it's basically, there is a notch in this that's designed to true the disc brake rotors. And there is sort of a graded down edge on it meant to pry open disc brake pads. So if your disc brakes are rubbing, if you're having trouble truing a rotor that gets hit by a rock or something, this is definitely worth hanging on to.
Awesome. Sarah, I will kind of collect a list of Sarah's must-have or recommended tools, and we'll put it
For sure.
in the post.
Yeah.
And maybe some links. That would be really helpful. And then someone else just asked, are you recommending a bike wash after every ride?
After every ride depends on the ride. I know that's not the best answer, but it's definitely, use your best judgment. If you're riding and it's hot and dry and, you're on the roads, you probably don't need to wash your bike. If you're taking it out on a muddy gravel ride, I would definitely wash my bike after that. I know there's some cross races that we'll do where, we're literally washing bikes every half lap, sort of thing, because the mud is just so thick. So I think it really depends on the conditions. And, I think you're kind of your own best judge of that. I would definitely wash my bike after a race because there's all that, salt and sweat and, leftover goo tablets or peanut butter or whatever kind of gets in there. And even if you're traveling, it's funny, I've had riders kind of come up to me after a race and go, I really need to clean my bike, but I don't have any way to do it. Can you wash it? I'm like, A, I have 100 other bikes to wash. B, I'm pretty sure you have a shower in your hotel room. So it's definitely, you can get creative with it. I know, like, when we're traveling, we oftentimes will, try to get one of the first floor rooms so that we can, if it's terrible weather outside, we can bring all of our bikes in and wash them in the shower, sort of thing. So there's definitely, you can get creative with it for sure. But yeah, kind of use your judgment on that for sure. Conditions.
Love it. Well, thank you so much, Sarah.
Yeah.
We'll look forward to next week. I hope everyone has a great week. It looks like, do you have one more question?
I have a question. How do you set up alarm so then you can get the notification when this is going to start? Because the last two that I joined is purely by luck. That I check my email and then I say the webcast is about to start and I'm already like 20 minutes late. Is there any way to set up like an alarm on the app so then it will warn me that we're gonna have
it's the same link every week, so you could just put a calendar reminder in if you want.
So it's a set.
It's always the same link. Yep.
It says the same link and it's gonna be on Fridays.
Fridays at 12 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. I don't know, how many more do we have, Laura?
This is 6, we have 10, so 4 more.
4 more.
Oh, okay, well, very good. Okay, good to know. Thank you for having.
Sorry, it goes from MailChimp as an email, but sometimes people's junk mail eats it.
Okay, well, mine it comes, but as I said, it's just by luck that I see the email. So, but I have it in